or to the television. Thank God.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just going to let everybody join in. Just please mute yourself once you're here. All right, great. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Just going to let some more people jump in. We have a few more people joining us. Again, when you join, just please mute yourself. And we are recording tonight. So please just be aware that if you come on screen, you are being recorded, and this will be shared out on our socials. Thank you guys for your patience. Just going to let a couple more people join in. Again, just a reminder to the people that just joined us, I am going to be recording this, so if you don't want to be recorded, please keep yourself off camera. I apologize. The person that usually helps me on our board just got to DC. She is advocating for us all week long down in Washington, DC, which is really exciting. She usually helps admit everybody, so I apologize for the delay. I do want to get started in a minute, but I just have a few more people to admit. And again, just a friendly reminder to everyone that is just joining us right now. This is being recorded, so if you do want to come on screen at some point, please just be mindful that you are being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, please don't come on screen. Also, when you join, please just mute yourself. I appreciate that. Okay, everyone, it's 7:03. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just bear with me as we do have some people still joining us. So welcome everyone here tonight. Thank you again for your time. For anybody that is new here, my name is Kate Prokop. I am the president of Connecticut Residents Against Medical Mandates. So we've been very busy this session so far. So this past week, we had an incredible response up at the Capitol in Hartford regarding our opposition to SB450 and HB5044. So we had about 16,000 people so far sign our petition in opposition to these terrible bills. We also have nearing 8,000 pieces of opposition testimony that were actually submitted to the CGA website, which is close to breaking a record as the most testimony ever submitted in opposition to a bill in Connecticut, which is very great. So it was great to see so many people participate in the legislative process, even though sadly it was cut short. As many people know, we were limited to 15 hours, which was, it started at 10:30 and they cut the hearing at 12:15 a.m. There were hundreds of people online that never had the opportunity to testify. And there were also many people that were still up at the Capitol waiting till 1, 2, 3 a.m. to testify. And they weren't able to testify on record. Very graciously, some people in the Public Health Committee opened up another committee room and allowed them to continue, but their testimony was off record. Very unfortunate. However, that is what was voted on. It was voted 18-11 in the Public Health Committee. We had 18 Democrats that voted to end it at 12:15 and censor their constituents, and there were 11 Republicans that voted to continue it, making it a completely partisan political thing, which it shouldn't be. Public health should not be political. It should just be a fundamental right that we have in this state, and unfortunately, it is not. But we do have someone here today that does believe that it should be a fundamental right. So tonight I am joined by House Minority Leader Vincent Candelora, who represents Connecticut's Republican leader in the House of Representatives. So welcome, Vinny. You want to come on camera?
Thanks, Kate. I appreciate all your advocacy on this issue. We've gone a long way back dealing with this when I served on the Public Health Committee. I served on the Public Health Committee starting, I think, around 2014. And then when I became leader in the House in 2021 is when I transitioned off of the committee, but I still follow these issues. And so what I wanted to talk to everyone about tonight was the nature of my testimony, which sort of focused on the procedural and legal aspects of the particular bill being raised, did not get into the mandate issues, which, is certainly an issue and could be problematic with Connecticut setting up an adult vaccine schedule. And obviously, we already have the mandate for our children in schools, especially since the religious mandate was removed. And that was part of what I was getting at this bill. So there were two provisions that I focused on in the bill. Under current law, the Commissioner of Public Health could already set the vaccine schedule. So he or she has the ability to take in the recommendations from the CDC and could reject those recommendations, could adopt them as is. But once those recommendations are made, the vaccine schedule is made for children. It is then submitted to the Regulations Review Committee for final approval, because any changes to the vaccine schedules happens through our regulatory process. Once an agency changes a regulation, it has to go through the Legislative Regulation Review Committee, which was established back in the 70s. And I think in 1982, it was actually codified into law, this committee. And it's a bipartisan committee. So it's made up of 14 people. There are 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans, 8 members from the House and 6 members from the Senate. And we alternate chairing the committee. So the Democrat chair if there's a Democrat Senate chair, there's a House Republican chair, which is the way it is set up right now. That body has to approve the regulations. In order to reject a regulation, it requires 8 members of that commission to affirmatively reject it. So hypothetically, if the commissioner had a vaccine schedule that all 7 Republicans opposed, they need an 8-person to join them, because if a motion ties, it fails and the regulations would go into effect by operation of law. So the notion that Republicans could frustrate the passage of a regulation is not true. It needs bipartisan support to fight a regulation. And it's rare that we've ever defeated a reg because we operate in a certain confines. The committee has to look at the constitutionality of a reg, making sure the reg is within their statutory guidelines. So they have to be restrictive. I served on the regs when we passed recreational marijuana. I didn't agree with marijuana being recreational or even medical. But when I served on the committee, I had to work on adopting those regs. I couldn't insert my personal feeling because I had my say when it was voted on in the state house. The committee also cannot amend the regs. So you could only delete a section of the regs or you have to adopt them. So it's not your normal sort of committee that has carte blanche over regs. And I say that because the measures are already put in place to make the analysis restrictive. And it was disturbing to me to see that these vaccine schedules, they want to exclude it from the regs review process. And I would argue, it's a huge power grab, especially in the area of COVID, because the COVID vaccine is still, as we all know, hotly controversial. People who, that's one area I think universally people want medical choice. Even if you might agree with vaccines, so many people I speak to have issues because they had so many adverse effects when they were all forced to get the COVID vaccine. If this law went onto the books, it doesn't allow for the Regs Review Committee to have that dialogue, and the commissioner would just be able to put it on the books without any input. And so that's, certainly been my concern. I think we shouldn't be removing Regs Review from the process and putting the commissioner as the sole arbiter. She's not elected, she's appointed. So I think the commissioner even agreed with that position, and hopefully this bill will be amended to address that issue. But as it stands right now, the bill sits with trying to remove Regs Review from the process. The second part that I spoke to was Section 15, that is affecting the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in the state of Connecticut. The history of that statute was back in the 90s, and I think it was like 1992 or 1993. The US Supreme Court, it was actually in 1990, it's when the case came down. But the US Supreme Court found that religious protections, should receive strict scrutiny. But when you have a law that's of general applicability, it doesn't get that same strict scrutiny standard. Um, Laws of generally applicability doesn't infringe on religious freedom. And so what that means is, as we saw in the state of Connecticut, well, the religious exemption to me is a bad example, but if we passed a law that said everyone would have to eat meat on Friday, and obviously Catholics don't eat meat on Friday during Lent, because that law is generally applicable to everybody, it is not interpreted as an infringement on somebody's religious right. It doesn't get the higher scrutiny standard. So Connecticut, in the 90s, and I think we were one of the first in the country, we adopted what was called the Freedom of Religion Restoration Act. That had also been adopted, I believe, on the federal level as well, sometime in the mid 90s. And basically, what that law says, and it's in our code, it's 52-571B in state of Connecticut code. And what it says is that if you have a law of general applicability, it is going to get scrutiny. And we are saying that if government imposes a law of general applicability that impacts religion, it needs to be done in the least restrictive means, and there has to be a compelling state interest in order to do that. And that statute has lied on the books since 1993. I think there's about 27 other states that have it. So back when the religious exemption was removed, frankly, I don't think the people pushing the elimination of the religious exemption for vaccines realized that that law was on the books. And so there was no conversation about a less restrictive means and what the state's compelling state interest was to eliminate the religious exemption. I think if you could try to make the argument that herd immunity, public health, vaccines have a public interest, a compelling state interest, in order for us to regulate that. And I think a court may find that. The second prong, which is, did the state do it in the least restrictive means possible, is also a question of fact. And I could frankly debate it either way, whether it is the least restrictive or not. Obviously we all feel that it was not the least restrictive, but a case could be made regardless. So the pending case that was brought in the state of Connecticut and being defended by the Attorney General Tong to try to claim that the religious exemption removal was unconstitutional. Um, the this provision, this challenge, stands right now in court and is being argued. The Attorney General is afraid that he's going to lose the case and is now asking for the state of Connecticut to repeal this provision as it applies to vaccines. So we are going to maintain the religious protections for everything, and still maintain this standard for everything but for vaccines. And they want to make it retroactive to any case that was filed um, previously since the removal of the RE. So my argument that I've made before the Public Health Committee is that that action is potentially unconstitutional and also a violation of a different state law. Because under our state laws, under Section 55-3, it's a simple provision that says no provision of the general statutes not previously contained in the statutes of the state which imposes any new obligation on any person or corporation shall be construed to have retrospective effect. So basically, Connecticut cannot pass retroactive laws when it substantively impacts people's rights. And I think it's a gray area, and I think it's another fight that we're going to have is, does the retroactive removal of the Religious Freedom of Restoration Act, is it procedural or is it substantive? And I would argue, obviously, that it is substantive because you are removing protections for individuals to be able to.
Vinny, unmute yourself. I'm so sorry. I had to mute. Amber, please mute your phone.
Yep, sorry. Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. So what I was just saying is I think um, it, it is possible that it's affecting a substantive right because substantively we all have protection, religious freedoms from laws of general applicability under the Freedom of Restoration Act. This law is now taking those rights away, pertaining to vaccines. And so while it's trying to affect the standard that the court is going to apply, because it's saying the court, basically no longer has to look at a compelling interest and least restrictive means. Um, I would argue by removing that standard, you're now affording no religious exemptions for vaccines, and that in and of itself impacts our substantive rights. There is case law that's interpreted this statute, and I think we'll have to do a deeper dive on it. I think that there may be some arguments if there were contractual relationships created, like those religious exemptions that are filed on with schools already, that the change of this statute could impact those religious exemptions. For instance, if we ever remove the grandfather clause in the legislature, that removal doesn't afford us RFRA anymore. And so that's where I would say that this is a substantive right that's been taken away. So I put that out there to the Public Health Committee because regardless, they're potentially buying yet another lawsuit if they move forward on striking this provision. And I would argue it's cleaner for them to continue to fight with their current court case and not try to infringe on people's religious rights. Because, once you carve out RFRA for vaccines, you could now carve it out for anything. And it really has vitiated the religious exemption. And to the extent that government would say, well, there's really no religion that prohibits vaccine use, that conversation gets very dangerous because it's well established that government is not here to judge the sincerity of one's religious beliefs. That's been ruled on by the Supreme Court. And so for us to start going down that path, it's dangerous. So, you know, I think we will have these arguments. I'm hoping that we can convince the Public Health Committee to remove that provision, and keep the court case intact. And with that, I'd like be happy to answer questions. Um,
So before we go and answer questions, I just
yeah.
wanted to ask one question myself, because during your testimony, you did speak about the Medical Exemption Advisory Committee that was basically put together during the removal of the religious exemption. They created this committee. They said it was going to basically monitor the medical exemption process to make it easier for people to get them. And my concern as the president of this organization that's been tracking them is that at their most recent meeting in October, they stated that they were concerned about the sharp increase in medical exemptions. And at the testimony at the public hearing, the Department of Public Health Commissioner stated that the exemptions have risen from about 90 to 400 and something. And I don't think that that's a sharp increase. But again, the committee was supposed to be created to help with the process, which is basically what my organization dedicates a lot of its time to, helping people with understanding the process, helping the doctors get into the portal. We give a lot of our volunteer hours for that. And, this committee is supposed to be doing that, but instead I feel like they're going to come down as a regulations committee, almost making the process harder. So could you maybe speak a little bit to that, and then we'll answer everyone's questions?
Yeah, so when I made that reference, I misspoke in the committee because when the repeal of the RE was put into place, one of the clear things that came out of all the public hearings and conversation is that people were exercising the RE because the medical exemption was not a pathway for them. And the medical exemption was too restrictive, as you all probably know. You have to, exhibit anaphylactic shock before they would issue a medical. And there are a lot of families that did not want to subject a newborn infant to that danger, especially when the family has a genetic history of, vaccine injury or, severe allergies. So, as part of the compromise, there was a medical exemption review board that was created, a task force to look at it to make the medical exemption less restrictive and to accommodate people who might have, these genetic issues and take them into consideration. So the standard wasn't so strict because the medical society was worried about offering too much latitude for people, even though they wanted to offer that latitude. When it was formed, it was by statute under a different name. I had appointed my appointee to that commission. Apparently, the name was changed to the Medical Exemption Review Board, and they've been meeting, and we had no idea. It's not publicly noticed. Kate has been on top of it and recognized that fact. Now that we have that information, we will take a look because it was never the intent for that review board to be more restrictive. And the fact that they have 500 MEs, frankly, is a joke because when the RE was in place, I mean, I think we had 1,500 or so children with these exemptions. So clearly, and our immunity rates were 95 to 98% in schools. So the fact that there's 500, I think, is an insignificant impact, and does nothing for whatever the new herd immunity percentage is in the state of Connecticut. So we will definitely have to keep an eye on that board. My appointee is an APRN, which is currently vacant, which we have to get filled.
And I will definitely work with you to help fill that. I know a bunch of great APRNs in the state of Connecticut, and I'm hoping that we can definitely grab at least one of them to jump on this board. Given that they're not meeting that much, I just do think it's really important that medical freedom has some oversight and a voice here. Because,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not really doing what we expected it to be doing. So I'll go ahead and go to the questions. So the first question I see is from Janelle. It says, what about Representative Greg Stubbe, who requested Trump put an emergency order for exemptions to all states. So that is from the GRACE Act, actually. So our organization signed on to that act, and our secretary of CTRAMM just flew down to DC tonight. She's going to be meeting with Representative Greg Stubbe this week. We're also going to be meeting with some other congressmen, which is a really, really big deal. I'm not going to give it away right now because it's really huge, actually. But we're working with some large organizations to bring some light to SB 450 because of how corrupt it is. So we are again trying to get some national attention on this because, like Representative Candelora said, what they're really trying to do here is change the law during an active lawsuit. And regardless of the topic, that sets a very dangerous precedent. So I do think that people are really watching this across the country right now. So why can they apply RFRA removal to only vaccines? I don't know if you want to take that one, Vince.
Yeah, I mean, so RFRA, applies across the board to any religious belief, and government is not allowed to question sort of the sincerity or the content of that belief. And so what the bill is going to do is right now that the standard that's applied essentially a strict scrutiny standard saying don't mess with religion unless you have a really, really good reason. What they are going to now say is, except for vaccines, you're going to allow, you don't have that protection. And so because the statute would not apply to vaccines, it then defaults to Supreme Court law. And Supreme Court law says any law that generally applies to people does not implicate religion. So it would allow us to regulate vaccines without taking into consideration the religious component of vaccines, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. We'll go on to the next question. And again, just to actually finish that up. So RFRA, the removal of that is applied just to SB 450. That is a provision that is separate from HB 5044. It was a bill that came a few weeks later on March 4th. And again, it's the only thing that really is different from these two bills is this provision to remove RFRA for just vaccines. So the next question is, how long has that seat been empty? Meaning the seat on the it's called ACME now, guys. It's called the Advisory Committee for Medical Exemptions. I'm not sure what it was supposed to be called when it passed. But I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yeah, that one, it's probably been around 2022. It was initially filled and then it became vacant. I'm not positive when, but we did not know it was vacant because we never thought the committee was ever meeting because the name was changed.
Yeah, I'm really excited to hear about more oversight on this committee from you and from anybody else on Public Health Committee that, now kind of has a red flag on this because I really do want to get a good APRN in that position and make sure that they're definitely being included in these meetings. We wouldn't want them to jump onto the committee and then, not even know that there's these meetings going on. So I'm not sure what is happening, but I'm really excited to now, it's being paid attention to and everything's getting picked back up with that. So, so can you kindly repeat and explain regarding the grandfather clause? So you kind of touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to maybe just go into it a little bit more.
Essentially, and I don't remember the dates, Kate, you might remember them, but when the religious exemption was removed, and can no longer be used, everybody who was currently in school with an RE was grandfathered in and allowed to continue to use that RE. And then I believe it was a date like April of 2021. There was I think a cutoff. So if you were born prior to that date, you were allowed to exercise an RE, and everybody that came after could not.
Right. So basically what he's saying is if there was a new bill introduced, say, to remove the grandfathering clause for the kids that were grandfathered in before April 27th, 2021, RFRA wouldn't apply to them anymore. So it could impact everybody. We're not saying that it's going to impact the kids that are grandfathered in. We're just saying it protects everything. So it protects the children right now that are grandfathered in. I have children that are grandfathered in. So that's really what we were saying, but the bill itself doesn't right now specifically go after that. Um, Anybody else have some questions? I'm not really seeing too much more. Someone said they want to unmute and ask a question. Joe, you can go ahead and unmute.
I'd just like to start by saying, Kate, thank you so much for hosting these meetings. This is my first event, so happy to be here and tremendous opportunity to communicate with Mr. Candelora. Thank you, Mr. Candelora, for coming on and speaking to the group. We don't know one another. I've been following your work and your colleagues' work at the state capitol. I want to start by saying that this is my first legislative session where myself and my family have been very involved for a variety of reasons and not just vaccines. There are a lot of things that are going on that interest us in this legislative session. And I have to be honest that I am frankly appalled to see what's going on in that state capitol building, frankly, from the Democrats, right? And I'm not a political guy, but I'm frankly besides myself to see all these bills. And we're proud homeschoolers. We are not vaccinated. My family and I played a big role in COVID, surrounding getting necessary PPE and food to families in need. We were out every single day during COVID, and no one in my family has had COVID. I'll let you read between the lines on that one. We feel like we're pretty healthy. We've got some solid resiliency in our bloodline just from being healthy people and eating well. But I do have a few questions, and I'm sure they're questions that have been asked before, but because I'm new, I'm hopeful that maybe you can answer them. What is the reason for all of this, Mr. Candelora? I mean, I understand that, some may say it's because of public health, right? But from my perspective, it doesn't really appear to be just about that, right? So could you tell me, in your opinion, and maybe Kate can weigh in on this, but what is the reason for all of this? Because it seems completely unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think the genesis of this came into play when people started scrutinizing the vaccine rates for children in schools. And there was a historic rise in the use of the religious exemption. Um, I would say it was insignificant, but it was a rise. And it was going from starting out to 1%, hovering to, I think, 1.8%. And that led individuals to believe that we should remove the use of the religious exemption because they believed it was being abused and misused. And I think people believed that there's a public interest in getting all kids vaccinated. I mean, there are believers that at all costs, people shouldn't have medical choices, that to protect society, we need to vaccinate. Um, and I think, I mean, that's sort of what led to the push of the removal of the religious exemptions. To me, it was a little disingenuous because we had a large pocket of students who were undocumented. Essentially, they didn't submit their information. We didn't know whether or not they were vaccinated or not. And they fell into the unvaccinated category, which rose the numbers up artificially higher. So that was sort of where that push went. And it was about an 8-year battle back and forth of trying to get rid of the religious exemption. As we all know, few states have done that. Most people have left it in place. There are accusations, certainly always at the federal level, of big pharma and the money that is made. There's no question the pharmaceuticals financially contribute a lot of money at the federal level and have a lot of influence. In Connecticut, we have clean election laws. That money is not influential for either party. I never saw people sort of acting on behalf of pharma. I just see people acting behind a movement that they think they're doing what's best for the residents of Connecticut. But for me, there's just so many issues, that so many problems with it. I mean, going to the HPV vaccine in the public health committee when I served, they were trying to mandate the HPV vaccine below the federal recommended age. And these are the things that are dangerous. So you may agree or be okay with vaccinating your child with the HPV vaccine, or let them wait till they're 18 years of age, because there's no reason that they need it to protect, a herd immunity. Yet there was a movement toward trying to encourage it, and there are believers that think it's going to, reduce cancer. And so that's just the way the state of Connecticut is. I mean, we are more of a um, the state pushes these issues onto individuals, and I think the modus really is just about more so about control, less about pharmaceutical. I know there was some testimony that we are digging into and looking at, because the state does purchase the vaccines out of the insurance trust fund. There could be a money issue going on there. I'm not sure, but I think ultimately it's just people believe everyone should be vaccinated, and they're going to impose that on all of Connecticut.
Thank you for that. And just two more questions. The first one is, if this were to go the distance, are Republican leaders willing to take this portion of it to court, or are they already doing so? The portion about removing
Yeah.
yeah, I'll let you answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're always strategizing what our options are. And I think as a party, we can't bring lawsuits, but there are individuals in our caucus that have brought suits in the past. And I imagine this issue will get litigated again as well. And it may get folded into the existing case that's pending.
This may seem like a silly question, but what would be the repercussions if this were to go the distance and these laws were passed for individuals, adults, if they did not comply to this law? What would be the repercussions of that for our residents?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's a two-step process, because right now it would be a vaccine schedule created for adults. So maybe they'll recommend shingles at the age of 55. None of those recommendations become a mandate until it does. So if down the road you see employers beginning to mandate that their employees comply with the adult recommended vaccine schedule, those issues could be litigated. And that's sort of the concern I have with RFRA, because now you are really infringing again in all areas. But it's going to be a two-step process. If the law passes, it doesn't create an automatic mandate, but something else can happen for a mandate to occur. And yes, like nursing homes, especially right now, we do have mandated vaccines for nursing homes. And that's where I think it's going to go and be expanded potentially to the employees.
And they did write in the bill that they're going to allow religious exemptions for nursing homes. But I do want to make it very clear that another concern is that they're using the word standard of care in this language, which sounds very insurance like to me. And I worry that if we don't see mandates, we see things tied with our insurance coverage to kind of requiring vaccines as part of like their standard, I don't know, of care. Again, it's just a weird word to say mandate as far as I'm concerned, but
I
I did
think,
want to note that there are religious exemptions for nursing homes still.
yeah, and I think the standard of care, I do think they're trying to maintain insurance, because now that the CDC isn't listing all the vaccines, there is a fear that people who want the vaccines aren't insured any longer. So I do think that may be why that language is added. But I just don't trust where this is going, because it's too easy now. It's a one-step process to turn this into a mandate.
Right. All they have to do is change one word. I mean, you can see right at the beginning of this bill, in the first few sentences of the bill, it says it changes from children to residents. That's a very broad change to me. So it just shows you an example of how broad a language change could be in the future. So I just wanted to look at some more questions, and Vin did talk about this, but it says rumor, but it's not a rumor. So one of our board members, Amy Maraca, did a very strong testimony about a lot of stuff she uncovered. That was not really CTRAMM, that was all her. She uncovered everything herself. It was her testimony, even though she is on our board. So I don't have any answers for that. And I think Vin answered to the fact that they are looking into her testimony because she made a lot of very serious, again, this is alleged, but she's looking into it and she wants other people looking into it. But the question was, rumor is that if SB, 450 is passed, that the commissioner can use OSHA to enforce COVID vaxes by imposing fines on companies. Talk is that CT had a surplus of COVID vaxes and that this is a way to raise money. I don't think Vin can answer that. Again, that's part of what Amy had, written in her testimony. I don't know, Vin, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, there's money to be made everywhere, and so I could see that certainly happening. We're just looking to verify and try to get that information verified. I think it is credible. It's not outside the realm. I go back to when COVID hit and we had the testing contract with SEMA 4 for the COVID vaccine. And, that company was collecting everyone's genetic material when they were running those testing sites. And it was a genome company. It was not a testing company. They collected all your genetic material. If you read the fine print, they claim they aggregated it, but that company made billions of dollars by being the host testing for people with COVID. So you think the motive is, oh, they're helping to see if people have COVID, but ultimately they did make a lot of money off of it. So nothing to me would shock me. And that's why we are looking into the accusations and trying to verify them.
And to go further into what Vin just said, very, very, the company that SEMA 4, it was a company that Ned Lamont's wife um, was invested in. And this company basically was given a no bid contract in 2021 for all of the state's mandated testing. So if you were a teacher, if you were a state employee, like you were forced to use this one company. I mean, he said billions of dollars were made off this. So I absolutely believe everything that Amy is saying. Like I said, they are verifying what she's saying, looking into it because it's not crazy. Connecticut has done this because, quite honestly, they're not held accountable. We know that we are in the minority. We need more people running that care about these issues to hold these people accountable up there in Hartford and not just on Zoom calls and on social media. I mean, we really need to fill some seats, especially in the House. We'll talk about that more and more. I just want to look at some more questions, and if anybody else wants to raise their hand, we have about another 15 minutes. Would an adult that didn't have a vaccine be denied care in a medical facility or a hospital? So, like I said, in this bill, the language is still there that says you can submit a religious exemption. So, like if you had a parent in a nursing home or medical facility, you could still submit a religious exemption for them. But they are mandated to get certain vaccines, yes. And I don't know if that would really have an impact. State employees are already mandated for certain preventative care, and if you don't participate, you face a steep premium increase for every member of the family not covered, not just the person who doesn't participate. Could you speak to that at all, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. State employees, there's certain standards they have to follow. I don't believe there are any adult vaccines that are required. Obviously, that could certainly change, but it applies to sort of preventative care like colonoscopies, mammograms, physicals, eye checks, those things. And if you don't fulfill those, you could get a fine at the end of the year.
Yeah, so this really just it's the framework for a lot of terrible stuff as far as standards that you'd have to follow to receive care or receive coverage, or any of that. It removes the review committee that oversees all of this and gives unilateral power to one person who, quite honestly, during the removal of the religious exemption, we had a different Department of Public Health commissioner, Renee Mitchell-Coleman. She didn't want to release the school-by-school immunization data. She thought it was a violation of privacy. And quite frankly, Ned Lamont made her life a living hell. She quit her job. She sued Ned Lamont allegedly for discrimination. And, he had a sitting commissioner for 2 years, and then he placed Manisha in, right during COVID. And she came in as an infectious disease doctor from Yale. So to me, he, kind of cherry picked her in. If he doesn't like what the commissioner's doing him, they're appointed. He will just replace them. So it's really him. It's really giving Lamont the power to mandate whatever he wants. Because again, if the commissioner doesn't do what he wants, he will just replace them. So just a little bit of history there for you guys too. And I do want to say that the commissioner has, she is constantly promoting on her social media channels for people to get the COVID vaccine, for people to get the flu vaccine. So she's a big supporter. That doesn't mean she's going to mandate it, but she fully believes in, those vaccines. And I think that the majority of Connecticut is not getting boosters on COVID. And I think, 4 years ago, things were very, very different as far as the COVID vaccine goes. So we have to remember that. And these kind of bills just set frameworks for very dangerous places if we're ever to go back into a situation where we're in a, shutdown, employers are mandating vaccines. We'll see. Can any adult resident submit an RE for themselves and get it notarized in case these bills pass now? That's tricky. A lot of people ask this question to our organization during the COVID mandates for employment because they were worried their employer was going to mandate the vaccine. But until your employer actually mandates it, they won't take one on file. So you can't submit a religious exemption for a vaccine that's not mandated by your employer. We saw this time and time and time again. So, I mean, it might depend on your employer, but definitely employers from large companies, if you try to submit a religious exemption for a COVID vaccine and they didn't mandate it, I don't know. It just doesn't really hold up in HR. So again, I don't know if Vin wants to speak to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say is if you signed one and dated it, and just held on to it, it would be interesting to see if it could be used into the future and how it would be impacted. But I think a lot of HR departments wouldn't take them because there's no reason to right now.
We did get them written. So like my husband and a couple board members they all work for a very large company around here, which I will not say. And they never mandated it, but everybody was very, very nervous. So they preemptively wrote theirs, had them notarized, and we still have it to this day because we never had to submit it. So you could do that for yourself. I'm just saying you might not be able to submit it, but like Vin said, have it notarized so that it's dated and that it exists from that point in time forward. Just a couple more questions here, guys. Then do you see that one from Liz?
So I'm looking at, are there criteria that defines what constitutes a public health emergency? So no, that's an area of the law that I've been fighting to try to change. Unsuccessfully, the Democrats were agreeing to help modify it, but essentially, the governor has broad authority to declare a public health emergency. And with that comes all sorts of ability for him to have a lot of unspecified power. So, I don't think it would, well, I think there would have to be particular reasons to be able to exercise that emergency. But I don't believe the definitions are found anywhere in statute. So the only example we could point to is the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's also the one thing, we always have to be careful of, and this we had feared this would happen back before when the RE was in existence. If there's an outbreak in a school, that particular school, there could be a public health emergency declared, I believe, for that one institution that would give some latitude for the state to come in and address the issues that are in that particular area. But for a statewide, obviously, there needs to be a larger statewide implication. And the other thing too, with the DPH commissioner, right now you have an infectious disease doctor who is heading up public health. Naturally, her forte is vaccines and disease. But the criteria for a public health commissioner is that they need to just be a medical doctor, which is much broader. I mean, you could have somebody who's an ophthalmologist, that would end up being the DPH commissioner. So while it might seem like, from the state's perspective, this law makes sense because of Jutani's background, when you look at this going forward 20 years from now, it might not make any sense at all that you would want to put this kind of power into one individual. And that's why we have it go through the regulatory review process. But also, as we all know, vaccines were typically limited to people in close quarters that are vulnerable. And so that's why you see mandates in nursery schools, in schools, and in nursing homes. And even why they, then imposed a meningitis vaccine for colleges because they were in dormitories. What this bill is now doing is sort of opening up the door to expand vaccine mandates to everyday life. And I think it's really moving far away from the narrow scope of when vaccines were important to be used. And so not even getting into the exemptions per se, I think our state and even in the country, we overly rely on vaccines as a public health measure. I mean, frankly, the same way we rely on medications for public health as opposed to healthy choices and healthy eating. And that's where I think people become suspicious. They point the finger that these industries are making a lot of money, whether it's in processed foods or whether it's in big pharma. And that big money is what drives decision making, not science. And what is disappointing to me is this has only increased the debate, and it has only increased more healthcare and vaccine hesitancy. So the very people that want vaccines to be used, this horrific dialogue is, and people feeling like they're being forced into something, is actually defeating what they're trying to impose on everybody. And that was something that I figured it would happen when they removed the RE. And I think it's why a lot of states haven't removed it, because they recognize, give people their choice and let them live their lives and make decisions for themselves. If you force people into a corner, they're going to come out fighting. And unfortunately, Connecticut hasn't learned that lesson.
So really quick, someone asked a good question. Is there any Connecticut law that allows public university to override a valid religious exemption when it comes to dorm housing? I just wanted to clarify that when they removed the religious exemption, they did not clarify very good language for what happens at the higher education level. So many people that are involved right now with SB450 and HB5044 see these bills as the bills that would come in and allow, universities to say, no, the religious exemptions removed for adults too, because it applies to all residents, not just children anymore. So no, now this applies to you and no more religious exemption. We don't know yet. Again, it was done very poorly for higher education. Right now, universities are typically allowing children that had a grandfathered religious exemption to go from high school into the university with that grandfathered exemption. But we're seeing some state schools are taking them. We've seen UConn fought it for a while and then took them. Someone on our board actually is a mom to some UConn students that fought for those rights there. We have Eastern Connecticut State University taking them, but Central is refusing to take them. So it's very, very convoluted, and there doesn't seem to be one good answer for everyone because the way the law was written. But again, I do see these bills as a bill that would basically allow universities to say, no, this applies to adults now for education. And, you know, unfortunately, we'll see what happens when they pass. But I do see this as an avenue for them to be able to say that this is, you know, something
Okay,
at the higher education level. Go ahead, Vin.
and to that point, I think that's another argument.
Oh, sorry, one second, let me mute them.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's another argument I think that could be made to why it's a substantive right that's being taken away. Because if the RFRA no longer applies, colleges could if they chose could say that they're not going to honor the REs at the higher ed level. I don't imagine that would happen, but that's another example of why this retroactivity should not stand.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, we're at 7:56 and I do need to get going. Vin, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Again, this is our House Minority Leader, Representative Vincent Candelora, just spent the last hour with us of his Sunday night explaining HB 5044 and SB 450. He was the first individual to testify in opposition. He is looking for an APRN for the Advisory Committee on Medical Exemptions, to which CTRAMM is going to help him do. But if you are an APRN and you would like to join that committee, please reach out to me so that we can connect you with Representative Candelora and get you on that committee, because we need a voice for medical freedom there, overlooking all of this stuff and making sure, you know, that, again, we have a say in all of this. So again, thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop recording. Have a great night.